Hi, I'm Jesse and you're watching JL's Comics. Thanks for pressing play. Today we're talking about Cloak and Dagger, the character duo created by Bill Mantlo and Ed Hannigan at the height of the war on drugs in the early 1980s. They've always fallen somewhere around the B-level character range, but that doesn't make their story any less interesting. And with a live-action TV series set to premiere on Disney ABC's Freeform channel in June of 2018, it's a perfect time to brush up on your knowledge of this pair. Today, of course, we're talking about Cloak and Dagger. That would be Ty Johnson and Tandy Bowen, who become Cloak and Dagger respectively. They were created by Bill Mantlo and Ed Hannigan all the way back in 1982. And as I said in the intro, it was at a time when the drug epidemic was reaching massive proportions. It was that same year, in fact, that Nancy Reagan's Just Say No campaign kicked off. So what we're going to do with this video, as we do with these history and origin videos on the channel, is talk about the publication history, the people behind the characters. We'll talk about their biographical history, where they come from, and their origin. And then at the end, we'll wrap up nicely with some key issues and some books if you're interested in reading more about the characters, some things that would be important to their story. So in Marvel Age number 6, Bill Mantlo tells of a time when he visited Ellis Island, and he says that they embodied between them all that fear and misery, hunger and longing that had haunted me on Ellis Island, and in fact that island itself plays an important part in their origin. We'll get to that in a moment. Co-creator Ed Hannigan said, "I think they were just different enough to appeal to fans, and they weren't the usual crime fighter types. The homeless runaways angle probably struck a deep chord with adolescents. They were a male-female combo, but one that wasn't the main hero with the other sidekick, so they were unique. Also, they didn't engage in the usual wisecracking pattern, so they were a bit more serious, which played well off of Spider-Man." And the third quote is from Mike Mantlo, Bill Mantlo's brother. He says Bill was also pleased that Cloak and Dagger featured an interracial relationship between characters who were urban, inner-city residents. Bill worshipped New York City, and the Cloak and Dagger storyline echoed his sentiments. On more than one occasion, he did tell me that Cloak and Dagger was his proudest accomplishment. So Cloak and Dagger come from two very different backgrounds. Cloak himself, referring to Tyrone, was streetwise. He was a boy with a stuttering problem. He grew up in a ghetto in Boston. Tandy came from a more privileged socialite background, and both of them decided to run away from those upbringings. They both escaped, running to New York City. They're very young and naive kids, teenagers. They were hoping that could just get there and have a fresh start. So they get there and they're immediately preyed upon by the mob, by people in the drug trade. And that ties into Spectacular Spider-Man issue number 64, which is where they first appear. Spider-Man swinging through the streets, and he encounters this man who's in distress, and he tells him that he got into debt. The man was forced to work in the illicit drug trade, and experimentation. We find out later that this man named Simon Marshall is actually a pharmacist. But immediately that's when Spider-Man meets Cloak and Dagger, and Cloak says, "We have come for you," referring to the pharmacist. Right away they duel. Spider-Man thinks this man is being chased down by these villains, so he wants to protect him. But he discovers right away that they both have respectively powers of light and dark. In the midst of the battle, daggers of light fly from the woman's fingertips, and they melt into the bloodstream of Simon Marshall, which kills him. And Parker learns later of Simon Marshall's mob dealings from a friend at the Bugle. That's when he finds out that his lair was on Ellis Island. Remember, I told you that was important to the story. And it was raided, and the police found the bodies of all these dead kids whose bodies had been riddled with drugs. Spidey goes there to investigate, swings in on a chute made out of webs, and he finds Cloak and Dagger in the midst of interrogating some mobsters. And it's here that we learn that Cloak and Dagger were also a part of those child experimentations, but somehow they survived, somehow they escaped. He says, "We were alive because something in our body chemistry made us different from the others." We don't know what yet. The pharmacist's prescription drugs interacted with the difference to turn them into Cloak and Dagger. And it's also here that we learn that Cloak and Dagger are more vigilante than hero. It's not justice we want, Spider-Man. It's vengeance. These men must die. In fact, all of those kids were their friends. Those were the only people they knew basically in the city, but they had died at the hands of the men that they were going after. With Spider-Man trying to be a moral compass and an authority figure for these kids. That's what they were, kids at the time. He says, "That'll make you criminals, just like the men you're after." The next year, 1983, they have a 4-issue miniseries, based on their popularity. And we learn right away when they escaped from the pharmacist in Ellis Island, they sought shelter in Hell's Kitchen in Father Delgado's church. And that's where they basically formed their base of operations. And from there, they staged their war on drugs. And Father Delgado continues to play a role in the lives of Tandy and Tyrone. And he is one of those characters like Spider-Man who is sort of a father figure and tries to play moral compass to them, asking them about their vigilantism. And then later in Marvel Team Up Annual number 6, we actually revisit the time when Spider-Man first met Cloak and Dagger. The mobsters are actually trying to create a new Cloak and Dagger by resynthesizing that same drug the pharmacist had made. It's in this issue that the New Mutants are actually leaving for home from a Broadway performance of Cats, no less, when they're attacked, and Rob and Ron and Roberto are actually hit, bullets flying everywhere. The two were actually carried off by the criminals, and they were intended to be the latest kids exposed to the experimental pharmaceuticals. Spider-Man explains to them that teenage mutants must have body chemistries that are very unique too. And that's where we first get this question that Cloak and Dagger might have this mutant latency in their genes. It's where that is first proposed. Dagger's exposed to the drug again while they're dueling, and her powers go into overload, and it takes Dagger to help bring her back. Really a nice quote here. The darkness and the light dispel each other, leaving them as they were. And it's here I want to bring up an interesting point to you. The relationship between Cloak and Dagger is actually symbiotic. Cloak needs Dagger's light to help feed and calm this hunger within him. And it's called the Dark Force and something else, and I'll touch on that in a moment. Without Dagger's light, Cloak would basically be this monster. He consume all of life's energy. And conversely, Dagger needs Cloak. The light within Dagger's body would just build up and it would just explode. So she regularly needs to be diffused by expelling this light into the void of Cloak, into this hungry darkness. In New Mutants number 23, Cloak and Dagger actually become an amusing quote, normal human beings. Their powers were transferred over to Sunspot and Wolfsbane, and Cloak was actually really fearful that he would lose Dagger at this time. He thought that their only unifying quality was their powers, because remember, they did come from those disparate backgrounds. And that wasn't the case. She had to make him feel better. In the next issue, issue number 24, that same question that was raised in Marvel Team Up Annual 6 is raised again by Professor X, and their origin here is updated, where Professor X says that the pharmacist's drug interacted with the children's DNA matrix, triggering a gradual, ongoing mutation in their fundamental genetic structure. Now, Terry Austin was the one who picked up after Bill Mantlo as a writer. He further updates their origin to say that hunger within Cloak in the Dark Force is a malevolent being called the Predator. So instead of him fighting this dark hunger, he's actually fighting to hold this predator at bay. In the Predator and Prey graphic novel by Bill Mantlo, you get to learn more about Predator. In 1991, the last issue of the ongoing series is published, and it's here that it's revealed by the demon Despair. So he claims to have created Cloak and Dagger. He said he created a light form and a dark form that both bonded with Cloak and Dagger. And it's finally in 2010's Cloak and Dagger special, was a one-shot, that their origin is tweaked once again. Instead of them being mutants, we learn that they're actually mutates, meaning that the drug mutated their DNA rather than it activating something within a latent power within their DNA structure, as Professor X initially thought. And now they've continued to be in Spider-Man lore. They met the Beyonder, who stripped them of their powers for a while. They were instrumental in defeating Carnage in the Maximum Carnage event. They played a role in Spider Island. So they've been in a whole variety of events up until now, when they will transcend comic books and their animated appearances to be in a live action show. So now, with your newly armed knowledge of Cloak and Dagger, you get to go to the show, you get to read about them, and you'll know much more armed with some information about them, understand their motivations and their backstory. Those key issues I mentioned to you: Spectacular Spider-Man issue number 64, Cloak and Dagger number 1 was the first miniseries. If you want to read about their origin, that'd be Cloak and Dagger issue number 4. They did have an ongoing that was in 1985. Issue number 6 of that ongoing is the first full appearance of the Predator. When that ongoing ended, it switched over to Strange Tales. Strange Tales 1, 1987, first appearance of Lord of Light, and issue number 8 is the first appearance of Mr. Jip, who was created by Terry Austin. And he really did that so that Cloak and Dagger wouldn't always be fighting drug runners. Terry Austin said that readers might have gotten tired of seeing them always going up against drug dealers, and honestly, the drug dealers weren't really much of a threat to them. And also, I'd recommend, if you can find it, picking up Marvel Age number 6, where you get to hear from the creators themselves about the characters. And Incidentally, that Marvel Age number 6 has a depiction of Beta Ray Bill, which predates his first appearance from Thor 337. And then, of course, if you're a cover collector, Mike Choi, Mark Brooks, J. Scott Campbell all have some really amazing variant covers out there. So that's it. Thanks for watching. And if you know something about Cloak and Dagger that you think would be helpful for others watching, please go ahead and leave it in the comment section down below. And if you like this type of video and it's your first time here, don't forget to subscribe. So thanks everybody for watching and listening, and I will see you in the next video.